Welcome, guys, to this particular stream. And I have Franco. Did I pronounce it correct?
François.
Francois, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have Francois with me. So Francois is the creator of Nuqs, which is currently the main agenda for this particular live stream. And we're just gonna have a discussion around the library, what was the motivation, and also try to see, also try to go through the documentation together. All right. So first off, like I said, the agenda for this particular call is just to have a discussion, talk about this particular library. This library has come in very handy for me while working on Next.js project, and why I try to save the particular state of my application in the URL, right? You could actually do this with the use search params from Next.js, I think app router, but like this particular library actually adds like an extra layer, and it gives you this particular type safe flexibility, right? And that is what really caught my attention about it. Francois, can you just give us what was the motivation for this particular library? Like,
Initially, I think the motivation for it was that I had long forms, like big forms with lots of inputs, that I kept losing whenever I wanted to reload the page, or if I wanted to start on my phone and continue on my laptop, for example. And so looking at that, the only real way, there's only two ways of doing this really, is either going through the server, like persisting your data temporarily on the server and then catching up later on the other side. But thinking about this problem, sometimes you don't even have a server. If you're working on a single page application, there might just be a static bundle where you don't have a live server where you can do this kind of persistence. And the universal place where you can put all this state is the URL. You can't put too much in it, but you can put sufficiently enough in it for it to be useful in terms of persisting it both through space and time. This is a concept that I like to explain when I talk about URL state, is that your application, if you use React use state, is locked both in space and time. In space because it's only on the machine and the browser you're working on, and in time because if you reload the page, it's lost. So putting in the URL, it allows you to transfer that URL to another machine, so that breaks the space lock. And you can also bookmark it and come back to it later down the line, and that breaks the time lock. So this is like the superpower that URL gives our applications. And as you said, there are facilities to deal with search params in Next.js. Use search params, use params if you want, like blocks of the path name. But those are a bit verbose. They're very imperative to work with. And especially in the app router,
correct.
when I started working on Nuqs, actually, I worked on Nuqs a long time ago, and for at least 2 years, the project stayed small and only used on my website and a couple of others. It's only last year when I started migrating my personal website to the app router that I started work again a bit more seriously, because at the time, reading the search params is not a problem. Updating them is where we need a few tricks. And at that time, the app router did not support shallow routing. So this is updating the URL without updating the server, without calling to the server to re-render the React server component tree. At that time, it did not support that. So that was a bit of a challenge to make sure it worked. And eventually, with a bit of back and forth with the Next.js team, they managed to implement that. But the problem is that there are two APIs to do URL updates, or search param updates in the URL in the app router. Either you go through the router API, use router, and then you call router.push or router.replace, or you go through the history API if you wanted to do it in a shallow way, like without calling the server. So this is extremely difficult to compose depending on what you want to do. And Nuqs already had this approach of choosing shallow yes or no based on a prop, because the pages router has this API. You have a unified API where you can choose whether to do it calling the server or not. And so I wanted to mirror this in Nuqs in the options. And so, yeah, there was a bit of hacking around finding solutions. And it's fortunate that both my implementation in Nuqs and what Next.js recommends ended up being the same. And so that's basically hiding all this complexity under the carpet and giving you a declarative approach with the type safety sugarcoating on top.
All right, cool. So I think that's a very, really, really amazing motivation behind this, because it actually takes out the abstraction, right? Like, it actually makes it very easy I won't say easy, but like more simpler to manage your states, right? Like you
Yeah.
said, for example, you have a component with a lot of use states, and this particular state are particularly just on that component, but you might actually need them maybe to be able to go back or to like have a previous state of that particular of the particular functionality you're working on. You might just want to think about, okay, I just want to go with Next.js method, which is just use search params and whatever hooks is available. That works for you, but when you want to extend it to like large applications, you might have to start building maybe your own particular state manager, right? Which is quite very, very cumbersome to do. Like for example, you're just working on a new application. So this is a very, very amazing library out there. So the number one feature that caught my attention, like I said earlier, was the type safe. How type safe it is, like with JavaScript. For example, I've gotten to use it where you're on a particular component, you could actually you have this autocomplete, right? This autocomplete with the library that, okay, these are the particular states you already have in your use query states, or in your use query states. These are particularly the values, maybe they are integers or whatnot. So cool. So can you just tell us about like what was the idea around the type safe? Because for me, I always like looking out for libraries that actually type safe, because JavaScript doesn't really do enough. We need TypeScript, right, to
Yeah.
extend the ability of what we do every day as JavaScript engineers. So like, how was the approach moving this to like a type safe approach? Yeah.
Yeah. I would argue that even TypeScript doesn't go far enough. My background is actually in C++, where types are much more present in the language. I tried doing JavaScript before TypeScript was all the hype. It was
Cool.
like a bit 50-50 between TypeScript and Flow, the Facebook alternative. And I had a miserable time working just with JavaScript. So it was really a great moment when everyone started migrating toward TypeScript and finally having some form of type safety. For Nuqs, well, for most of the libraries, I do TypeScript everywhere. I try and give this. This is basically only DX, really, if you think about it, because the runtime of Nuqs is extremely simple. But I would say 90% of the code base in Nuqs is pure TypeScript. Types, definitions, overloads, generics. And this, I think, is what makes the difference between a library that works and a library that's nice to work with. Because if you, as a developer, as a consumer of those libraries, you want to have this good experience while you develop, while you have this autocomplete, you have the right types connected to everything. And also you want the library to be trustworthy, because types can tell you something, but the runtime can be something else. There are cases where it's easy to lie to TypeScript because you take a shortcut. And this is one of the things that I wanted to ensure in Nuqs is like everything matches. So the test suite also checks both for types and for runtime and make sure that everything connects. But this is, the biggest complexity I think in Nuqs is in the type system. It's not in the runtime. The runtime is quite simple.
Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, so cool. So speaking about URL states, right? There are most developers that are they're actually in support of, okay, you could save your state's URL or the state of a particular component in the URL, right? While there are some other engineers that might say, okay, it's there might be some to doing that. So like, so for you, right, who is actually the creator, right, of Nuqs? Well, what do you think about that? Like, are there more advantages to disadvantage of saving your state in the URL, or are there any, like, can you just give us any disadvantage or advantages? Like, what do you think?
Sure. I'm going to point back to a kind of meme that went on Twitter a few weeks before, where there was like a massive block of use state, like all the possible,
Yeah, I
like
saw
there
it.
was at least 30 or 40 in there. And
Yeah, I saw it.
a lot of people would think that, okay, URL state is the greatest, let's move everything to that. No, that's probably not the best way. The first thing to remember is that URLs have a limit. So you can't put too much information in there. The same way you can't put too much information in local storage, or the server is less limited, but you're limited by your bandwidth, essentially. But no, in terms of thinking what is a good state to put in the URL is the same way of thinking what is a good state to persist on the server versus what is a good state to keep locally. Some
Okay.
UI state that describes only the UI of our application and how it is configured, what is supposed to render. This could be a good thing to put in the URL. There are actually two kinds of URL states that you might want to work with. The local ones, the ones that only the clients, the render functions in your client's components
Okay.
deal with. Those are local states. And the server-aware ones, the ones where you want to update the server whenever they change, and you want the server to be able to grab those values and maybe do some data fetching or some server-side rendering logic with it. So those are a bit different. For example, the second one would be pagination, filtering, anything that hits a database query, for example. But the first one would be things like, is a model open? Your server doesn't really care if the model is open or not. This is like only pure UI-based things. But if you copy-paste this URL to someone, you want the UI to look the same, essentially, when they click that link. So that you want to have the same content and you want to have the same presentation. So this is basically the two kinds of URL states you might want to define. Content is the ones that the server will be impacted, and presentation is only for your client.
Okay. Cool. All right. So I think do the particular browser URL, right? Like the browser where you put in your URLs, it has a particular limit, right? Yeah, it has a particular limit. Like what exactly is the limit? Like is it in kilobytes?
No, well, I guess, yeah, 2 kilobytes, I think, would be 2048 is generally accepted as the safe limit for everyone. I think that now that Internet Explorer is dead, may it rest in peace, we can, I think the evergreen browsers have a bigger limits, but there is a thread on Stack Overflow somewhere that everyone keeps linking to, so it's easy. You type what is the longest URL, and it'll give you the number. I'm not sure exactly which one it is.
All right.
But
All
yeah.
right. All right. Cool. So I think we could just quickly just go through the documentation. Yeah, cool. Okay. So first off, I think this should be very 100% open source, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if developers want to contribute, how could they contribute to this particular library?
Most contributions, there is a roadmap. If you go to issues, in the pinned issues, there's the roadmap that I've put there, where I essentially dump ideas of things I want to do with it. And so there are bullet points here that if anyone wants to contribute, please open a discussion. Maybe we can like iterate on ideas and all. And then feel free to open pull requests. I'll be very happy to review any suggestions. I've already had lots of contributions by other people, both in features, bug fixes, and iterations over little details. So that's great to see that there is a small but growing community around this project, which is super nice because this is my first project that actually becomes popular. So really happy with it.
Yeah, cool. So like anyone interested in going to contribute to this amazing library, I think you just check out this roadmap and you should get everything you want here. Cool. I see there are already some issues already open.
Yeah, there's a few things that I need to look into. I'm on holiday at the moment, so it's a bit difficult to keep diving into the issues. But when I come back in September, yeah, I'm actually going to work with a client that will be using Nuqs, so maybe I can try and save a bit of time to do some digging.
Amazing. So I think let's just jump back to the documentation and let's quickly jump here. Okay, so to set this up, currently we have different options, right? So you could use npm yarn bond. All right,
well, it's just a Nuqs name package. It's easy to copy the one you use. That's why I put those.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think I was reading this yesterday on the documentation. So there was a previous version of this.
Yeah. Initially, it was called Next.js query state, which was the name of the hook. Because I was not really inspired with at the time, I just kept reusing the same hook, like this use query state that I've published, copy pasting it a la ShadCN, essentially between projects, both for my own and for clients. And I got tired of doing this copy paste, and I published it on NPM like out of the blue like this just to be able to use it on another project. And I was just looking for a name. So it's for Next. It's called uSquareState. That'll do. But it's really annoying to type. So I decided to rename it on the 1st of January this year. And so it's been a good idea, I think, because the Nuqs name is more easy to market, I would say. But there are also issues with it because I realized after the fact that Nuqs is an Urdu word for defect or flaw in Arabic. And so, yeah, when you look at Nuqs on Twitter, you see some people speaking alphabetized Arabic and Latinized, I guess. And so that name comes up from time to time. So it's interesting. But the things you learn, you should probably, if you want to name a project, look it up before you find the name.
Yeah, definitely.
I just saw it was free on NPM, so I went for it, but I didn't actually look on Google or wherever else. So yeah.
Oh, all right.
So yeah, Nuqs is the new name. So yeah, Nuqs is currently the two names exist in mirror of each other. Like whenever I publish a version, it's published under both names. But when Next.js 15 drops, Nuqs 2 will drop as well. And at that time, Next uSquareState will be deprecated, essentially.
All right. Okay, yeah, I think this should be it on NPM.
Yeah, they're both a mirror of each other. Like the CI process first publishes Nuqs, then just renames the package and publishes Next uSquareState. So you have the same content in both.
Yeah, cool. I think let me quickly put this up wrong. This should be. I actually want to go to Nuqs, like Nuqs NPM page. Okay, I think I've been there earlier.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Wow, we have currently have a lot of weekly downloads, which is quite amazing. Because it's really a lifesaver for like Next.js developer. So this quite took off recently or earlier this year.
But that's when I published the new name. If you look at Next uSquareState, this new uSquareState has been live for 2, maybe 3 years, I think. And so the new name only started, this year, essentially. But the crossing of the migration path, essentially, I've been monitoring that for a while, and it's the biggest user of the library, I think, is Vercel. And for a good while, they were stuck on Next uSquareState in a beta version. And finally, they migrated to Nuqs. So that's good. Right. It's good to know that they won't have any problems with V2.
That's really good. Yeah, I think I saw it on the documentation too. Used by Vercel. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I think it's used in the dashboard.
Cool. Like the hosting dashboard.
Yeah, I think it's in the usage dashboard. Whenever you change the range and the filters, it mirrors that in the URL, and it uses Nuqs to do that.
Wow, amazing stuff. And there's a lot of community behind this. A lot of people behind this. Community contributors, I think. Right?
Yeah, one particular one I want to shout out to is Pontus Abrahamsson, who's working on Midday AI and regularly posting how he uses Nuqs on Twitter. And he's doing an amazing job on this particular application, showcasing how you can do this URL state kind of thing. And that's been really great to see him marketing and evangelizing the concept. Because, we want more of URL state. Yeah,
exactly. Cool stuff. Amazing stuff. So let's jump to documentation real quick. Okay. Basic usage. Okay, so I think to use this, I think I got to use this on a particular tutorial which I made like on YouTube, I think some month ago. And when I was going through documentation, like to prepare the video and stuff, right? I went through the documentation. It was as if I was using use states, right? But what I was just using was actually a different hook that was exposed from Nuqs. So use clients, you import your particular state. I actually want to take this to my VS Code. But I think there's a playground. Yeah, let's quickly jump to the playground.
The playground is not actually interactive. I would like it to be at some point, but doing interactive things in Next is a bit tricky. I need to look into how to make that work. I've not been able to make good interactive playgrounds in StackBlitz or Code Sandbox or anything like that with Next, unfortunately. But at some point, I would like people to be able to just hack through the code and build components that use Nuqs and its options with autocomplete and all. in that browser directly, not having to go through a dev environment, having to compile the thing, run it, and etc. That would be amazing. It's just so far I've not been able to figure out how this works. So if someone listening to this knows how to do this, open to contributions, gladly, please let me know.
Definitely. Definitely. It's really been nice to have this on like Sandbox, like you said. Yeah, definitely have this example. But I think this just shows the power of Nuqs, right? Because for example, now this is just a state in our component, right? For example, we have counter which on press or on click of this particular button you increment, and on press of the other button you decrement, right? And this on a regular React component, this could just be a use state.
Yep.
Right? But in our case right now, the state is just in our URL directly, which is quite amazing. Now, looking at the code, it's very simple. Already what you like, if you familiarize with React or you use React in your everyday today interaction, you see this is very simple, right? We just have components, which is called basic counter demo page. Then we import our particular use hook, the counter and the set counter. So this is the setter function to set our particular state in the URL. Then this counter represents the value directly, right? Then on click of this particular button, which is what we have here, you increment, take the previous value, then take out 1. You decrement, then on press of the other button, you set the counter, which is the setter, which we already talked about, add 1 to the previous state and add it up to the URL. Amazing stuff. This is quite amazing. I think we have batching and hex colors. Yeah, I think this was what I mostly used. Now, so before we move on, right, I just want to talk about something. It just came back to my mind. So passing the particular data, because going through the documentation, it was mentioned, right, where, for example, you need to pass your data, right? Let's say for example, we can't always save strings in the URL. There could be situations where we want to save, maybe for example, numbers, or like what we have on the screen right now, hex values, which we want to use in our component directly. So like, how was that actually handled in this library? How are you guys passing the data?
I think there's a lot of people who ask me, why didn't you use Zod to do the parsing? Because Zod can do that. Zod is very popular. Lots of Next, particularly, but JavaScript or TypeScript applications use Zod in terms of validation and transforming things. And Zod is really good at coercing and transforming a string into some other type by doing this kind of parsing for us. But Zod is lacking the other part, which is the serialization. It's like when you want to update the URL, you need to take your state variable, which may be a number, a date, a boolean, whatever, and turn that into a string. And Zod cannot do that. Zod does not have this duality of things. And for something to work well, you want the parsing and the serializer to work hand in hand. You want them to be close together. You want to be collocated so that they are one unit of translation between a native JavaScript variable type and the string that is represented in the URL. You want to have this tied together. And so this is why Nuqs provides its parsers and allows you to build your own if the format of the URL, you want something else, for example. But here in this particular page that you're on, the parsers page, every single parser is described and has an interactive demo of what it works, how it works. So pick one as you wish and you can interact with it and you can see how the URL is updated with it.
All right. So I think we have parsers for Boolean. If you want to particularly pass your data to a Boolean, true or false. Then we have the strings, literal. We also have eons. Nice. You could actually pass your data and timestamp. Like this actually gives a lot of extendability of the library. You can pass in your arrays, your JSON. Amazing. And you could also create yours, like you mentioned. You create yours and pass your data. Like for example, if you're working with some complex data you want to save on your URL.
Give it a rating with the stars. You'll see what it means of doing a custom one, for example.
Okay. Let me give this a 5. Amazing.
And you see you have the stars in the URL as well.
Yeah, amazing,
There you go.
amazing stuff.
So this is the kind of thing. If you want to customize your URL because for some reason you have a legacy application or you want it to look a particular way, creating custom parsers for this is the best way to do that. It's like binding a particular representation of something as your data, as your state, and what it should look like in the URL, and doing this two-way binding between the two. This is what parsers and serializers, I call them parsers, but it's parser plus serializer. If you've ever done Rust, this is the equivalent of Serde, the crate Serde, which does both serialization, deserialization. This was the idea.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so one more thing I just want to talk about here. So Nuqs, right, actually works on the server side. So how does that work? How could, because in the documentation here we see there's a server side usage, a particular section for that. So can you just give us can we just talk about it? How it
Yeah.
does that on a particular server, yeah.
Yeah. So on the server, the idea is if you look just at the Next.js documentation, what they would recommend is passing the search params prop to the page component. And that tells Next that this page is to be server-side rendered so that anytime you pass a new search param, the server-side rendered page reruns, and you can use those as your logic. So either for data fetching or for conditional rendering or whatever. But the problem is that this search param thing is not strongly typed, and it doesn't have the same type safety as what you would describe on the client side with Nuqs. So we still have the need to parse on the server. We also have the need to validate. I'll come to that in a second. First, we need to parse them. And so we need to be able to run the same parsers that we run on the client side, on the server side. Limitation, I would say, in the Next.js API is that only the top level page components can receive those search params props. You cannot put a search param props in any components, server-side components, React server component, in your tree, and it will magically receive the search params. Only the top level ones receives it. So if you want to access it in a deeply nested React server component, you would have to prop drill all the way down, which is painful because you don't have access to context on the server. And so I was a bit annoyed by this limitation, and there is actually a hack by using the React cache deduplication system where you can create an empty object, repopulate it with something, mark it as frozen, and then everything later down the line while you render will be able to access that. So this is what the server side, the search params cache, I think I called it on Nuqs, is doing. At the top level of your page, you pass it the search params that Next gives you. It will parse it, store it in this cache, and then provide it to any React server components from there on. So you just get it, and everything is type safe, obviously, both in terms of keys and values. That was actually fun to do with generics.
Yeah.
Again, the runtime for this, maybe 5 or 6 lines. The whole file itself must be 100, 200 lines of just type safety, TypeScript madness. This is the fun of building libraries with TypeScript. Some people say that, yeah, TypeScript is not for, I don't know. Some people don't like TypeScript because of this, but this is library TypeScript. This is very different to application TypeScript. My library code looks like this, so your application code doesn't need to. That's the difference.
Yeah, that is very, very very correct. Very, very correct. All right. We talked about some stuff about Nuqs, amazing stuff, amazing stuff. So I think we talked about the helpers already. So testing. So
that's actually a good point to talk about because there's been some discussion lately on the testing part. Like, how do you test a component that uses Nuqs? Because in a test environment like vtest or Jest, you don't have the Next.js facilities like the app router being mounted and all that Nuqs needs. This is actually an open question at the moment, is how can we mock Nuqs? Should we mock the Next router things? Should we provide a mock in Nuqs itself? Should you mock the component? It depends because there's a lot of hierarchy and depends on what you actually want to test. So this is something that I need to discuss with some people that are more knowledgeable about mocking and testing than myself. So yeah, still an open question and really happy for the discussion to go forward on this.
All right. So currently it's being worked on. Amazing.
So this in the documentation, I just want to mention that this testing part is for how people can test their components with Nuqs. Internally, Nuqs has a lot of end-to-end tests being done to make sure that they are behavior covered. I don't really believe in the terms of code coverage, more in the terms of behavior coverage, especially with Next, because Next has a lot of controls and configuration that change completely the way it behaves, both pages router, app router, shallow routing, non-shallow routing, all these kinds of things, but also the base path and everything. So the CI suite is quite large in terms of making sure that it works with things that can throw the router off track, essentially. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so I wanted to ask, so is there any compatibility with the pages router? Like,
Yeah.
does this only work for app router or does it
No,
work
it
for
works with
pages
both.
router? It works with both.
It works with both because of a hack. There's
Huh.
actually a few hacks in this thing.
Okay.
As I said, you see the API is a bit different between the app router and the pages router to when you update the search params. Next gives you this compatibility layer that you import once with the same, like Next/navigation. And it works both in the app router and the pages router. So the same code can work in both. But there's a few catches in terms of updating the things. Like the APIs that Next Navigation gives you for accessing the router itself don't actually work for search params when you have a base path. There's like a combination of things that didn't work well. But fortunately, Next exposes the router in an internal. So you can kind of hack around that and access it and be able to still update things, making sure that everything works in tests. This is the parts that I would like, that I have started to clean up in the version 2, which will probably drop support for Next.js 13 and will start support from 14.2, I think, because between 14.02, I think, and 14.2.1, sorry, that's a lot of numbers, there was a lot of flux in the next releases because that's when they started introducing shallow routing in the app router. And so there's a lot of versions. You can see it when you start to install Nuqs. There's a table that tells you this works, this doesn't, this works, this doesn't. This works, but you need to do that. This kind of version range is a bit cursed at the moment. Nuqs 2 will start support only from 14.2, I think it is, onwards, and drop the other versions.
All right, cool. So the version 2, how soon are we expecting it? How soon is it going to drop?
Well, Next.js 15, Nuqs 2 depends on Next.js 15. Next.js 15 depends on React 19. React 19 depends on Meta, so who knows? But essentially, from what Andrew Clark was saying, they are working on the current problem that they're trying to fix, because it was in RC a couple of months ago, and they found a problem with suspense boundaries being triggered in different order than before, like being triggered in sequence rather than in parallel, which caused some data fetching waterfall issues for people who did data fetching on the client. So they are discussing reworking. I'm not exactly sure what the timeline is on this React 19 release, but essentially it's a waterfall of releases from there on. React 19 ships, Next.js 15 ships, Nuqs 2 ships as well.
Amazing.
So I have my eye on the Next.js releases. Every time there's a new release, the Nuqs is testing everything to make sure it works. If anything breaks, I'll know before anything.
Definitely.
So,
definitely. I think that's one of the amazing stuff about being a library maintainer. You always have to like stay updated with that particular framework or meta framework, right? You always have to stay updated to make sure your library is working for the next release before it goes into before developers start using them. So they could have a better or a very good developer experience. Amazing stuff. All right. Okay. SSR troubleshooting. It says because the Next.js router is not available in the SSR context, this tool will only return no. Okay. Server-side rendering.
I need to update these things. Maybe some of this is no longer true. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Need to look into it.
I think, yeah, definitely. So the next part, SEO.
Yeah, there are some dragons in there. So SEO, essentially, you need to be very careful whenever you use variable URLs, like URL state, because Google search engines in general will crawl every single URL they see, and they will not really make sense or not of what is in the search params. They will consider the whole URL. And they will usually report that some URLs are duplicate of each other, or some are not crawled because of some reason. I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but the thing you want is to define a canonical URL that defines essentially what is useful for the crawler and what is useful to show in the search results page. For some applications, most applications, the search params will be optional, will be things that you add to the URL to configure the rendering of your application. Whether it is, as I said, content to filter different things, or whether it is rendering a model or something like that. Most of the time, what you're really interested in is the path name, not really the search params. There are other cases, however, where some applications use the search param as the source of truth. Best example for that is YouTube. YouTube, the video ID is in the v search param. So in this case, you want the canonical to include that search param. So you need to be very careful when you start doing this of making sure you define this canonical URL and which parts of the URL you want in this canonical.
Yeah. Before Nuqs comes into the market, I think you said, first off, you have to get React 19, and Next.js 15 has to be 100% ready.
Yeah.
Then also, before we could get Nuqs, right? So are there any new features we should be expecting in version 2? Like any new changes? Are there going to be any syntax changing? Or are we going to still have the same syntax we have, but like extra layers or extra functionalities? Yeah.
There's not going to be much new functionality. There is, however, a lot of baggage that comes in Nuqs 1 from the next use query state days, because when I did all the refactoring about a year ago now, I saw that some parts of the API were not tree shakeable, so I changed the way we access the parsers, for example. They were all in a big object, and now you can import them individually. And so the import for this big object of parsers is now deprecated, has been deprecated for almost a year now. So as long as you don't see the underline saying that something is deprecated in your editor, you should be fine. The migration documentation is in the V2 PR, which I can link somewhere if you want. If you go to the pull requests on GitHub, you'll see them. You'll see it. And essentially, no, there are no new APIs. They like to say this. But the main breaking change will be about, these legacy things that have been deprecated but are being removed. And the drop of older versions in order to remove some of the internal hacks that we had to put in place back in the day to work with all the versions of Next.js. So validation, that's something that I want to add as well at some point. It raises a lot of questions because it now opens the possibility for an update of the search params to fail, which was not possible before. You would just serialize and dump it in the URL. But now that you add validation, whenever you try to update the URL, you want to make sure that the URL is correct. So you want to run this validation on updates as well, which can make it fail, obviously. And that opens questions because now the function can throw and all these things. So that would probably be a breaking change. The main reason why I delayed V2 and all other greater features afterwards is because I thought that Next.js 15 would come out quicker. But because of React 19 being blocked, that took a bit longer than expected. So, yeah.
All right. So we're definitely looking out for version 2 once we get some Next.js 15. And I think this is really amazing conversation we had about this library. I'm trying to see if we have any questions from YouTube. Okay. All right. Cool stuff. So there's
the one last thing I could probably talk about is because we're talking about URLs, there's the missing piece of how do we play nice with links, because sometimes you want to click a link to another part of your page and pre-populate it with the right search params and all. This would be in the utilities section of the documentation. There's a little utility called a serializer that allows you to populate links with, I will call them hydrated JavaScript native data types, and it will call the serializers for you and generate the URL the same way the hooks would. And so that gives you a simpler way of recomposing the URL rather than doing string concatenation every time. So this is a lot of people have been asking about this recently, about how to essentially integrate Nuqs Nuqs aware components with the rest of their application with links, so making sure that everything plays nice together. And this is the answer. This is the serializer that allows you to create a link with an href that contains variables, data, state for various keys. Yeah, I would have loved to be able to do it completely type safe the same way that 10-stack router does it. But unfortunately, Next has some preview feature to make the routes type safe, but they have no story around search params in there yet, if someone from the Next team is listening. And essentially, it would require more collaboration between Nuqs and Next to be able to have this tight integration of this particular route, accept these particular params of this particular type, and have some link components or some wrapper around the link components be able to know what the particular route accepts as params and have the autocomplete and be able to type check that everything matches. That would be amazing. There have been some work around this, but it requires some code generation step to make sure that you generate the right type declarations. I'm not a big fan of code gen in general. Maybe that's GraphQL, PTSD, but I don't really like having TypeScript is kind of a code gen, I suppose, but having a separate code gen that also needs to be later transpiled or not just for type checking, I don't know. It feels like a bit of a sidecar that needs to work with the code. So there we go.
So I think there's currently not really much tutorials out there on how to get started, like tutorials or articles, right? So I think most people could.
There will be a couple of courses coming up soon. Various people that will include Nuqs or be specifically about Nuqs. I'm not exactly sure, but I've been contacted by some people about making courses for this. There will be more content coming soon about this.
Definitely, because it really has a lot of features and it's very rich. So like a lot of people definitely need to check this out and put out content about it, like in the nearest future. It's so amazing. Yeah. So thank you, François, for doing this. And so guys, I think we should wrap up this particular live stream and see you guys in the next one.
Yeah.
Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Ido.